I know a lot of people want to talk to you about a lot of things, but I'm wondering how many people want to talk to Eddie Gallagher about raising children.
Well, that is, I don't get those questions very often. So yeah, I'm glad to talk about something different.
Today we're talking about raising boys, but you also have a daughter. So you have your youngest boy is Ryan, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Then you have an older boy.
Yep. So Ryan's 11, Trevin's 20, and then my daughter Ava will be turning 17 this week.
Okay. Okay. Wonderful. And this is wonderful. And now that you're retired, you get to spend a lot more time with them, and that's a wonderful thing too.
That is.
So
Yeah.
you grew up just north of me. I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. You grew up in Indiana, right?
That's right. Well, I actually grew up all over the world. My dad was in the Army, so I moved around every 2 years until high school. I ended up in Indiana, Fort Wayne, Indiana, and joined the military out of there.
So that you already answered the question. Who influenced you the most as a young boy? I bet it's your dad, huh?
Yeah, I definitely would have to say my dad, and my mom as well. Traveling around, being a military brat, moving around every 2 years is, it's not the easiest. And then with my dad's profession, he was, gone as most military members are, doing the job or deploying. But he always managed, when he was home to make time for myself and my brother. Never brought homework with him. You wouldn't even know he was in the military unless, every once in a while he'd show up in his uniform or he'd take us to work. And then my mom, on the other half, she was a strong military spouse who, put up with the rigorous traveling and the demands of, the Army. And she did a hell of a job. Everywhere we went, she set up home and made sure we were taken care of. And we remained, because we moved around every 2 years and there was only four of us, we remained a pretty tight unit, as a family. We were always protective of each other. And so, that, I think a lot of that, growing up like that, it definitely influenced me to obviously do the job that I did and also raise a family in that job.
And so, I forgot to say I want to thank you for your service. And I don't even know if when people say that to you, if it really has the gravity that it should, because I almost feel like people say that like almost, God bless you, and they don't even believe in
Yeah.
God. Somebody sneezes. But I don't want to insult the fact that people should probably say to you, thank you and your family for your service, because Andrea is that strong rock at home. She's the anchor at home when you're overseas. And so it really is, it's a family contribution to what you did.
Oh, that's exactly what it is. I mean, Andrea has been the rock in our family for the past 13 years, since we've been married. And that's what it takes. When people say thank you for your service, I'm completely grateful for it. And I'm glad they're thanking me, but it was my pleasure. I enjoyed every day that I was in for 20 years, minus the last two, but I wouldn't have been able to do my job without a strong wife at home, taking care of the kids in the home front and making sure everything's getting done.
Yeah, because then you could be there with a clear head. You don't have to worry. Like if you have to worry about what's going on at home while you're out there, then it's a losing proposition entirely.
Exactly. Yeah.
So my next question was going to be, who contributed the most to what you think a good father is? A lot of times there are other people in our lives when we're young. Like my father didn't want to hunt, but my friend Joey's father hunted and he took me hunting. So he taught me to love hunting. Did you have other contributors besides your dad and your mom?
I throughout my childhood, yeah, there was, I had other male influences in and out. Like I said, I moved around every 2 years. But growing up on military bases, there was other, friends of my dad that they were in the service, and they would probably, take us out. I was, big into Boy Scouts when I was little. So I mean, that was definitely influential. It was back then when it was the real Boy Scouts, where we'd actually go on hikes, long hikes and camping, and it was everything was sort of a kick in the ass. But that, influenced me as well. And that, the men that actually took the time to take us out and teach us, things like shooting, learning how to camp, learning how to survive, they were big influences on me as well.
Another organization that's been destroyed by the new PC culture.
Yeah.
Do you think it's different disciplining boys than it is girls? You have a daughter, you have a unique perspective.
Yeah, and I'm learning that as I go. It's I grew up when my mom was the only female in the household, just me, my younger brother, and my dad. So I didn't really grow up around, any sisters or anything like that. And the discipline in the house was done by both parents, but I think it's a little bit easier when you have two boys. What I'm learning now is, disciplining my daughter involves a lot more talking, involves a lot more, delving into why she's feeling a certain way. And that's just the way, what I've learned is how females communicate. Whereas my sons, and my oldest son brought this to my attention not that long ago, a couple years ago. He's like, Ava, his sister, she gets treated differently when she gets in trouble or whatever, or things like that. And I was like, yeah, because she's a girl and it's
different.
It's different. I have to talk to her, and I can't, if I yell at her or, if I'm stern with her like I am with the boys, it doesn't work. It doesn't compute with her, because then she'll just, spiral down even more. Now, I'm being mean, which I don't even think I'm being mean, but it took me, it's been a learning process for me. And I'm like, okay, when I have, talk to my daughter, I go in there with a different mindset than I would with my boys. My boys, it's more fire and forget, like, get this done. If you don't get it done, you're going to pay the man. They understand that. It's just, definitely different. More kid gloves with a daughter.
Did you think being in the military, and your dad was in the military, that level of task, I don't want to call you a taskmaster, but that level of commitment to doing things the right way translates to your fathering skills, actually?
Yeah, I would think so. I think, but I also think, in the military, being a taskmaster and getting things done, there's no room for, we always say there's no room for failure. Like, we try to do everything, right the first time. And then if you do fail, you're going to get hammered on. Whereas being a parent, you will fail. You will mess up. You're a human. And I think what I've learned is, in the military, if I messed up, I'd be extra hard on myself, be pretty frustrated. And I was taking that same, idea when I was raising my kids, and then, things didn't work out a certain way between me and them. It would be, I'd get down on myself. But I've learned that, it's better. It's also good for them to see you fail, or them to see you vulnerable and be like, hey, you know what? I did mess up on this. I could have done this better. It helps them grow as a human. And
yeah, I'm happy to be talking to you too. I wanted you to be the first person to do this because I've watched you from afar. I see the things that you do with your boys. I know you've even gotten your boys to start doing a podcast here and there. And being a thought leader, if I can call you that, puts a great deal of weight on a person, no pun intended. And I often wonder what effects that has on the young men in the family. I want to start off with, I've got a list of questions I want to go through. So to just humor me for a second.
Okay.
So who influenced you the most as a young boy?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, my father was not fully present. His father was not fully present for him. That's something I'm very focused on breaking in terms of that cycle with my own sons. That cycle of working, providing for the family, fulfilling Maslow's hierarchy, but being absent in the process, right? Having your children's idea of you providing for the family being associated with seeing the back of your head when you walk out the door, and then you being exhausted at the end of the day and maybe not even present for say a family dinner or family time at night. And so for me growing up, my father was a serial entrepreneur. He was a firefighter up until I was 13, and then a bunch of businesses after that. And I love my dad. We have a good relationship now, but he was certainly not fully present in my life growing up. A lot of the things I had learned growing up, everything from how to shave, how to fish, how to hunt, how to field dress, how to lift weights, all that stuff. I kind of had to teach myself. I learned a lot just from YouTube and books and being homeschooled K through 12. For me, I was pretty comfortable with that idea of self-education and being a self-made man. But really, I'm often asked who my mentors have been, who the influential people in my life has been, have been, and I've never really been the type of guy who turns to mentors. I didn't really have a lot of that growing up either. So for me, really my primary influences were books, authors like J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and Arthur Conan Doyle. And I spent a great deal of time with my head down in books growing up. And then, from there, have certainly had men that I've learned a little bit from here and there along the way. But ultimately, for me, it was a lot of self-education.
So, who had the biggest influence on you as a young boy?
I'd say my dad. My dad and my grandfather, and then I would say that's continuing onward for my son, because my son has a really, really good relationship with his with my dad, with his grandpa, and then my son and I are close as well. So, I think I've heard people kind of say, it takes a village, to raise a child, and I'm kind of that belief, but I don't want it to be any old village. I want it to be our village that raises our children, just
Right.
because the ideas and principles are just going to be so different, and you don't want to. Not that they're right or wrong; they're just different, and you don't want them to be conflicted, and have too much conflicting information, which you're going to just end up with a lot of that anyway. So we're a pretty tight knit family, and there's probably there's four of us in our household: my wife Andy and my daughter Quinn, and then we have Jake. But we also have some in-laws, and they're around all the time. So there's really more like, and my dad is around all the time. Sometimes my brother's around. So you got 10, 11, 12 people around all the time for, my children to absorb stuff from.
So you really have a traditional family unit that a lot of us are familiar with. You're from the East Coast. You're from Poughkeepsie originally, right?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. So that's the East Coast style, right? The grandmother and the grandfather involved with the family, and everybody's kind of in together, and you just moved it all out to California.
Yeah, that's right. And then I grew up with like kind of maybe double or even triple the amount of family members around, because both of my parents, growing up Catholic and Italian, they they had both sides had many children, 9 kids on each side. So I got a lot of uncles, a lot of aunts, and they all had their own children as well.
So when you look at parenting, being a father, did you start to pick up pieces from other people and say, "I'm going to do that when I have a son"? Who influenced you the most with what you see yourself as a father?
I think it was just kind of the setup that we had whenever we go to my grandfather's house. It was a lot of like trial by fire, just letting kids be kids and letting them learn the way that they need to learn. Um, I don't remember. I mean, I know the adults would play with us and stuff a lot, and they would help us organize games and things of that nature. But I don't really remember an adult saying, "Hey, here's how you pitch a baseball, or here's how you, throw a football," because they just left it up to us to kind of figure it out, and we would just play and throw the ball back and forth. And then, of course, you would get made fun of a lot if you didn't do it the right way. If you threw the ball awkwardly or anything like that, you'd get teased and made fun of, and then you would start to learn. But my dad was the biggest, and still to this day is the biggest influence on me. And but I guess also, just seeing my grandfather, like what he was able to do. My grandfather was an entrepreneur. He worked on airplanes. He worked on the railroad. He had his own car lot where he'd fix up used cars and boats, and he'd resell them. And it was really weird because I didn't really realize it until I was older. But this idea of like, trying to get word out of the products that I have and Slingshot and different things like that. I didn't realize so much of that came from my grandfather and my dad, because all growing up, my grandfather had T-shirts made, in like the 60s and 70s that said Shell Bell Auto on it. His name was Sheldon. And he also had, like signage out front. He had a hat that had it on there. He'd give people a free hat when they came in and got their car worked on, and just to get the word out there, And then my dad ended up doing the same thing. My dad worked for IBM for many years, and when he was released from IBM, when they went through a lot of downsizing, he started his own real estate company and income tax business. And then so my dad's license plate, when I was a kid, it said "buy a house" on it.
That's cool.
And that must have sank in because I got 5 of them now. So
no, but they were good at merchandising. Both your grandfather and your father were very good at merchandising.
Yeah, and just good at getting the word of mouth out. And they were the kind of people that they're both the kind of people that when someone brings up their name, people get excited. They're like, "Oh yeah, I know that guy. Yeah, I get my taxes done from him as well." Or "Yeah, I bought a car from him." That kind of stuff. So yeah, I learned a lot of just, life can be pretty simple. You just need to be good to people, and people will reciprocate it back to you more often than you might think.
So you have a really, really good sense of humor. Like you and I are the same. There is no such thing as a bad joke. You know how people are like, "Oh, that's not funny." Like, "Oh, yeah, it is." Where did you get your sense of humor from?
I think so. I think that's from my, having grown up with 2 older brothers. I think, you grew up much tougher and rougher than I did due to the, particular environment that you grew up in. But I would say in terms of getting like grilled and made fun of, I got grilled and made fun of probably just as much as anybody else. So you learn to have, you didn't have to really fight in my neighborhood. It wasn't violent like that. It wasn't like a survival type of thing, but you did have to have thick skin or you're going to have some rough days ahead of you.
Do you have any non-negotiable rules when it comes to Jake? Like when you look at parenting, are there things like, "Look, I'm going to pick my fights with you, but these things here, no way"?
Yeah. So what sometimes, what could happen is, kids a lot of times are going to choose, the more pleasurable things, the things that they enjoy the most. They're going to want to play video games a little bit more. They're going to want to do certain things maybe more than you would like them to do. And so when it comes to that kind of stuff, I just try to make sure like he does the work that he should be doing. He's got some school work to do. Hey, did you take a shower? Did you like go outside today? Like those are kind of the non-negotiables. So if I see him sitting there just playing his game all day, I don't mind if he plays his game till his heart's content. I really don't, doesn't bother me very much. But I want to see that he's like participated in the family. I want to see that he's done some stuff for the day. So I'm pretty lenient because I'm not a huge fan of like forcing people to really do anything. At the same time, that's kind of your job as a parent.
Yeah.
It can be tiring. It can be exhausting at times. And so that's something that I need to be, conscious of. Like, hey, you kind of have to kick them in the ass a little bit here and there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Are you introducing Jake to physical culture, or is he taking it? Does he have an interest in lifting or any running, anything?
He has so he wants to be the opposite of me at the moment, I believe.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of his goal. And that was my goal when I was his age too, was to be the opposite of my dad, because I saw my dad in a suit and tie every day. And I was like, whatever that's about, I don't want anything to do with that. And so I think he's, and you mentioned earlier, I cast a big shadow, and I think he recognizes that. And I think he wants to try to find some of his own stuff. And he's really intellectual. And if I bring up like working out or something, he's like, I'm going to get into that when I'm older, like he says it like as if it's just like fact, and I'm like, yeah, he's probably right. He's only 16. So, so I try not to really, with both of my children, I try not to really, force them into doing a lot of shit that they don't want to do. What I would love to have happen is to encourage it, to show them that this is how I do things. And then hopefully they kind of come to some of these realizations on their own.
Do you feel that there are any really important qualities that a boy should learn and develop?
You know, I think a boy, the only way for a boy to kind of learn how to be a man is to be around men. And I think, you know, in our culture today, and I love the fact that you got this show going, because I think it's important. A lot of people don't have that. They don't have a kind of father figure to look up to. They don't have a dad in their life. You know, my wife and I, we're really fortunate in the fact that we get to spend a lot of time with our children. Maybe even you could argue too much time, because I think it's good for the dad to not be there sometimes. So the kid has to make a decision on, you know, is this a good move or not, type of thing. I think you need to learn some stuff on your own as well. But yeah, I think the only way to learn how to be a man is from being around men and kind of seeing how they act. How do you know, how do you know, how do I treat my wife? You know, how do I treat, you know,
Your
work?
life
How do I treat
really started
the
out.
things that I like or care about?
I don't think anybody would have wanted to trade places with you as a kid. Talk about your upbringing.
Yeah,
and your.
I'll try to give the abbreviated version, because it is covered in depth in my best-selling book, The Eagle and the Dragon. But yeah, I grew up essentially homeless, like in the woods, and we're talking, you know, when we're talking poverty, it's not a lot of the poverty that people kind of know today, where they still have nice clothes and a fancy phone and some gaming centers. Like, there was times, you know, we had beams lashed in the trees, and that's where we slept, because there was rattlesnakes on the ground and we had no place to live. And if we did have a place to live, you know, it wouldn't have electricity or running water. So we're talking no rooms, maybe just a small shack, a family of, you know, a family of six sitting there, sorry, seven.
You left yourself out. When you left yourself out.
You know, living in a, you know, in a small, you know, one room space. So, you know, maybe you got a sheet hung up, you know, in a back corner, for, you know, hiding the 5-gallon bucket that is where you go to the bath. In college, I ended up taking custody and raising my 3 younger sisters.
Wow.
So I raised all my sisters while I got my engineering degrees, my MBA, and I was working full time during the course of this as well, because I had no fallback plan. There was no couch to go home to. There's no, if it doesn't work, where do you've got some sort of option. I had nowhere to turn.
A guy who needs no introduction, and that's Aaron Singerman. How you doing, Aaron? Now that you've had a little bit more time under your belt,
I'm doing great
with your boys, and they're beautiful, beautiful children, and they're kind and they're sweet. But I want to know more. I have a better array of questions than I did when I had you on first. The first question I want to ask you is, who influenced you the most as a young boy? This could be a couple people, but when you think back, I mean, you may even want to tell the story about the Rolex and Grandpa Jack too. But who influenced you the most when you were a young boy?
You know, I think back to that, and I'm honestly not sure. You know, in one regard, I would say Arnold Schwarzenegger. Obviously, I got into bodybuilding and fitness, physical culture very, very young. At 13 years old, I was going to the gym 5 or 6 days a week. So I remember watching with my dad and watching Arnold Schwarzenegger in Predator. And he does like this with his arm. You know, he tells him to stop. And you see his arm. And I remember thinking that was so cool. And my dad always thought that movie was cool. So I want to say that my dad, but I also say that I was such a lost, bad child for most of my childhood and into my young adult years. I think I was very hard to be influenced. Period. I was probably more influenced by, you know, being around the wrong people and making my own bad decisions. So it's hard to say who I was influenced. Obviously, looking back, thinking of it now, my father stands out to me, but I'm so different than my father. We're almost polar opposites in a lot of ways. So, you know, maybe I was influenced in a way to be different. than instead of replicate the same thing. So that's the Papa Jack story is a good one because my Papa Jack was a dentist. He's still alive. He's 92 years old. Lives in New Orleans now, and he was a successful dentist and made good money owning his own practice. And he had a gold Rolex that he bought for himself, his 25th anniversary of his practice. And as a kid, I always was fascinated with his watches, in particular that one gold Rolex. And I always thought in my mind that maybe, because I made so many comments about how much I liked it as a kid, that when he passed away, maybe he would leave me the gold Rolex, because I figured that there was no way that I would ever be able to afford a watch like that myself. And obviously, it's funny, interestingly enough, I'm wearing a gold Rolex. But just as a, interesting, you brought that story up. But it was something that as a kid, I didn't have the kind of aspirations that I do now, or that I built over time. I just didn't even think that kind of thing was possible. Keep in mind, my grandfather, who was a dentist, was probably the wealthiest person that I knew personally. And in the scheme of things, compared to, the people that I'm around today, I would say that he would be, upper middle class, basically, or maybe lower upper class. But in New Orleans and the people that I was surrounded with growing up, I wasn't around any kind of wealth at all. I wasn't brought up poor by any means, but I just wasn't around stuff like that,
Affluence. You weren't around affluence. You're right.
Not at
Exactly.
all. No, not at all.
Now you have another granddad, wasn't he? Didn't he own a factory or something like that? And he employed a lot of your family?
Yeah, Charlie Singerman. He worked with his brothers. He had 3 brothers, and they owned retail locations in New Orleans. He owned at one point. He owned a women's clothing store and purses, men's clothing store called Country Fair that my dad worked at and I worked at as a kid. The Great American Cookie Company franchise he helped start, and at one point they had dozens of these. That's the big cookie cakes. They owned a jewelry store, and they owned a kind of like a Rite Aid or CVS at the time. And one by one, they lost those businesses because they got taken over by Rite Aids and CVS's and Mirror's jewelry store at the mall and everything. And so when my dad was given the business, my grandfather's brothers passed away. And when my grandfather passed away, he left the remaining businesses to my dad. And eventually the men's clothing store, Country Fair, got the prices at the mall went up, and Banana Republic took over the men's clothing store. And then the Hurricane Katrina took away the final Great American Cookie Companies. So it's funny though, Carl, Grandpa Charlie definitely, without question, had more money or made more money than Papa Jack. But Grandpa Charlie was so cheap that he would never buy himself a Rolex. I mean, this is a guy that when we took us out for family dinners, we would go to Shoney's because the salad bar was unlimited.
Right.
This is right. So they were not.
Have whatever you want as long as it's on the salad bar.
Yeah, 100%. Have as much salad bar you want.
I got to believe that Grandpa Charlie probably influenced you from a business standpoint. Owning all these businesses at least put it in the realm of possibility for you.
Seeing it, definitely seeing that, and going to the store. So at 13 years old, I started working for my dad at a Country Fair. And I would fold the clothes for them when clothes would come in, they obviously not come in folded. I'd fold them up and get them ready to put on the shelves. And then when I was a little older, like 14, 15, I was a salesperson at the store selling Girbaud jeans, Polo, Chaps, Ralph Lauren, Z Cavaricci, and stuff like that. And it was a good experience for me. And to see that my dad was the boss was definitely cool. It was influential for sure in the sense that it did show what was possible. And my grandfather owning all these stores, going up to the Great American Cookie Company as a teenager and be able to get me and my friends double doozers for free felt like a pretty cool thing.
Core, how you doing, Erwan?
Hey, hi everybody. Hi Carl, how are you? I'm doing great. Thank you.
Welcome back. So right now today you are in Mexico, correct?
I am.
Okay.
I am. Maybe I'll slightly turn.
Oh, look how beautiful that is. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So there is so
now let's talk a little bit about you. You were actually born in the United States, but raised in France, correct?
Yeah. I was born and raised in France. I'm actually 100% of Celtic origin. From my Brittany lineage, I'm basically Scottish and Irish and Welsh, basically. But I was made to believe that I was French because born and raised in France. And then it's only later on, when I was 38, 39, that I moved to the US.
Okay.
I was granted a very special immigration visa called O1, and it goes for, literally, they say it's for extraordinary abilities. So that's when an individual has something really unique, really special that they believe will benefit the community, the country. And in my case, it was about bringing this very unique approach and method to physical training, which is
Interesting. So, as a young boy, who do you feel influenced you the most, and who you have become?
my father, because, and I must say, and unfortunately, not for all the good reasons. I wish I would be able to say my father was an extraordinary man in every way. That is actually the case, but you learn also thanks to, and sometimes despite of, or because of your parents. But the reason why he played such an important role in who I am today, but also what I'm doing today, is that we lived in the far suburbs of Paris. So basically, literally it was still on the countryside, and there were woods just next to our house. Literally, I could see through the windows, 100 yards away, the forest.
Right.
Every day, every morning, I would wake up, open my window, even in the winter, breathe the fresh air that smelled so good because of the forest.
Right.
And the forest was hilly and with large boulders, like those who know rock climbing know Fontainebleau. It's like a mecca of rock climbing in France. Literally, the landscape was similar. And my dad was always taking us there. He was always taking us on long walks in the woods. But more than that, he was pushing me and my brother to climb trees, to climb rocks really high. Things that today most parents would be like, oh my God, I could go to jail for doing this. Which is literally absurd. Actually, he did believe that this was the way to make us grow strong, to be strong already, to learn about mental strength, to learn about courage, to learn about pushing one's own limits, to go beyond one's fears. Children. And so we did that. We did that all the time. Then we'll learn to do it even when he was not around. We'll learn to challenge ourselves, to not be afraid, and to always climb things and jump and crawl. And he would do it with us, by the way. He was most of the time leading by example. And what he was telling us, this is what I did all the time when I was a kid. I did that all the time. He had maybe some form of nostalgia for his own childhood when he was free and feeling happy and feeling strong, and he wanted to convey the same mindset and the same behaviors in his own children.
Started today. How you doing, Coach?
I'm great. It's always good to be with you, Carl.
So you are a dad. Actually, Natalie Kapitsky, who is my director of communications and social media guru, and she's actually in the background right now helping me keep the show together, was under the impression that you had 4 children, but you have one son, and that is your son Wes, who I met when he was a very young man. And I say man because Wes was never a boy. I mean, Wes was squatting like 6, 7, 800 pounds at what age? 16?
When he was his 16th birthday, a meet that I actually ran, he squatted 600 pounds. And then when he was 17 years old, he squatted 805. About a month after he turned 17, he was a junior in high school, and he squatted 805.
Yeah. So I have a hard time calling that Wes that I knew back then a boy.
Well, of course. Sure,
But he
sure,
was,
sure.
maturity level and age-wise, he was a boy. And you've done an amazing job with Wes. Wes is a fine young man. I know that he had his excursion away from strength, and for a while, he got a profession that's helping people, right? Because he's a physical therapist, right?
Yeah, he is a massage therapist. Yes.
Okay. And so, but he's come back. He's come back to his roots. I know he's training at the Ogre Compound again, right?
Well, he trains some. What he did is he's been married now. He and Joni have been married now for, I want to say, 7 years. And they bought a house 4 or 5 years ago. And he has a one-car garage that he has turned into a training studio where he can train a little bit more often at home. And then he has clients that are, in his proximity. He probably lives, at probably 20 minutes away. And so with his schedule, because he's got another business besides what he does for work, and and he's coaching people. So he's in here about once a week now. But the reason why he left strength is we had him on the show that you had us on another show, the two of us. When one of my training partners, our training partner, abruptly passed away right there in the gym.
Right.
And Chuck was a pretty big guy, but he had a lot of health issues, and that wasn't a mystery. And that had such a profound effect on him. So he went through this process of losing a bunch of weight. And but he has since then, in the last 15 years, he's competed in a couple of powerlifting meets, and he tries to stay, a little bit on the smaller side, than obviously me. But he still trains very, very consistently.
So over the years, I've heard you talk about your dad. We were just talking a little bit about him extraneously to the topics we were talking about. Who had the biggest impact on you as a young boy, and that you think really led into the person you've developed into?
Oh, without a question, it was my father. I idolized my dad. It was one of those things that when I was a young boy, he worked. Try to give you an idea where he worked in Florida was where we're from. In Homestead, Florida, it's called Turkey Point, or it was many, many years ago. And there's 2 nuclear reactors there in Homestead. And he worked for the heavy excavation.
You dropped out right when you said 2. Your internet dropped out. There were 2, and then you finished with excavation.
Okay. There was 2 nuclear power plants there at Turkey Point, and his company, they did heavy excavation, dug the cooling canals.
Okay.
And so I would occasionally get to go to work, and he would wear, construction boots, blue jeans, and a white T-shirt. So I had to have the very same thing. And if there was a certain way that he dressed, certain shoes, then I had to have them as well. And I was always enamored with how big and how powerful and how strong. He had a very commanding presence. And, so I always looked up to that, and as I've gotten older, not only do I look like, he did as he got older, but he and I sounded a whole lot, we sound a whole lot alike. And a lot of people, when I would answer the phone, even as a young kid, we've all of us, Wes, my father, and myself, have always had very deep voices. And so a lot of people would mistake me for my father.
That's so funny.
And so, I used to, those guys, the people from the swamp are a very different, breed of people. And they would take me out in airboats and helicopters, as long as my dad said it was okay. And I'll never forget, I can't remember the man's name, but he said, you know, my dad's name was Harold. He goes, you know, Harold, I think you look more like him than he looks like you. You know, so that's, you know, because I was definitely a mini him. There is no question about it. And as Wes, you know, has some of his mother's features, so he doesn't look, you know, as spitting image, you know, as I did with my father. You can definitely tell that Wes and I are father and son, but that's, you know, that's the connection with my father.
Who else in your life? You know, so like for me, he served in active duty overseas, and he wasn't a big gun enthusiast, let's say, and so I learned to hunt from my friend Joe DiStefano's father, Joe, also. Who else had him? As you know, because you kind of grab pieces of different people as you grow up, and you think, I like that, I'm going to incorporate that into me. Were there any other people, teachers, maybe anything like that?
Yes, and we always called him Jones. I had an art teacher in high school, and his first name escapes me, honestly, because we never called him. We called him by his. We didn't call him Mr. Jones. He wanted to be called Jones. And what he instilled in me, a lot of people don't know that I have an artistic background, and that's another story. But when drawing, and he really allowed me, he pushed me to be creative. And as a musician, learning that skill set from drawing, you know, how to push the boundaries of what, you know, let me give you an example. We have you'll buy these pieces of art, and it has numbers, and you color them in, and everybody shades and stuff like that, and it's a picture, but it's what you do outside the lines that really creates the art. And that was something that he really, you know, instilled in me, is like, push that boundary a little bit, go the extra even though you don't think it's good, just you know, go full in and extend yourself as far as you can, because it's always expanding your horizons. You know, how do you learn to get good at something? Well, you take something that you're not very good at, and you keep doing it until you get better at it. And that's oversimplification, but he really had a profound effect on me. And he was a high school teacher, and that made a big impact on me.
Usually when boys start to go through puberty, they start to search for their own autonomy. It's even recognized in psychology, you know, in the sciences. And a lot of times when they start to search for their own autonomy, one of the things they have to do is kind of break with their dad in order to become men themselves. And a lot of times it can lead to conflict. Like I remember when I was going through this with my dad, I actually cursed. And I thought I was going to get walloped. Did you and Wes have that when he was getting of a certain age?
It was probably after he got out of high school. Wes and I have always been exceptionally tight, but like from when he was very small up until 18, 19 years old, we never had those issues. Having been a single father and him living with me, it kind of created a situation where we depended on one another. So we never had that, like going through junior high school years. Now, after he graduated and he got through therapy school, you know, then that's where, you know, he and I would kind of butt heads. And I think that's what you're discussing.
Yeah. Did he ever
kind of made
challenge you? Yeah, like challenge you about something, like not hey dad, I'm going to beat you up, but he started to disagree with you, or you know.
Yes, and it was like the first time I really saw it was when he and Joni moved back to the Mount Juliet area where we're at, and we would kind of butt heads on coaching or how somebody should do something and things of that nature. So that it was one of those things, because I never went through those things when Wes was a teenager. I did not have that skill set of coping with that very well. When it did happen, as he became, you know, a young adult, so to speak.
Yeah. And so did you give him the latitude to have a different opinion, or did you, because I think as fathers, we want the best for our sons, but
Of
sometimes
course.
we think we know best too at the same time,
Well, I tell you what, it was a hard lesson, and being a coach has really helped me, get through some of those situations, because it's hard when not to take those situations personally. It's like, I'm doing all this for you. Why are you being a little pinhead, And what I've learned is, it's like, sometimes I've learned initially not so much, but as time went on, it's like, let's let him have his say. And then once he's had something to say, then I'm going to go, well, let me offer you my perspective and hear it. It's not enough to tell him what I think. I got to back that up with why I think that,
Right.
and I have to be very careful for it not to be primarily an emotional response. It has to be something where it's like, oh, because anytime I respond emotionally, especially him and I, because it's basically two silverback gorillas, and it's always going to be that. So I have learned to really take a step back and give him that levity and that latitude to even be wrong, and say whatever he needs to say, because he's not going to get that in a lot of the other relationships in life that he has. And he can say things to me that he probably can't say to his wife without it causing a big ordeal. But I learned that you have to stay open-minded long enough to go, let's see where this goes, and see if what he's initially discussing, if that's really the issue, or if there's something bigger in the background that we need to keep the channel of conversation open long enough for him to reveal what's really going on, because that has happened, a handful of times over even the past couple of years. And I can give you examples and all those things, are examples of where he was right, but he wasn't effective. That's probably something that I've tried to really, really instill in him as he became a young man and then was married. It's like, hey, there's right and wrong, and I understand all that, but there's also being effective. And you're going to learn that being effective may sometimes be more important than whether you're right or not.
That should be always. So what about discipline? What was your position on discipline with Wes?
He and I always had a very firm understanding of who was in charge, but it was never one of those things where, I like, hey, I'm the boss and it's because I say so. He was always very respectful. And like I said, because I was a single father, when he moved in with me because of, the better school situation and so forth, he understood the challenges that he and I would be facing. And um, it was rare. The probably the biggest issue that I had with Wes growing up is he would always be ready to go to school. But like, we trained really early in the morning, and I would come upstairs and he would still be in bed when we would need to be downstairs training and the guys are there. I'm like, Wes, it's time to squat. You're late and you live here, and
You live here.
so and when he was big, you just would have to be careful. It's like, look, son, I just made a pound of spaghetti and a gallon of tea. Don't eat all of it tonight. You got to have something for lunch, and those types of things. But he and I never, it was one of those things where I think it was because I didn't rule with an iron fist, that he understood that probably what my father instilled in me is there's a way that you speak to people, and you can have a commanding presence, and they tend to understand that may not be the guy that I want to trifle with.
Right.
And I have one incident when he was 18 that he really tried me, and we had a very strong discussion about it. And other than that, I think because of how open he and I have always been with each other, we didn't have a lot of the issues that a lot of other, father sons have. Now we've had our moments, but coming up, he understood that I'm in charge, and this is the way we're going to do things. And but I also, by the same token, I was always, I think what really helped him and I is making sure that I ask him, hey, what do you think about this?
Mhm.
You know, what do you feel? I mean, when you met me, Chris and I were in a relationship, and he was very close to her. And when we abruptly split up, he obviously was very concerned with me, but I also wanted to know. I said, no holds barred. You say whatever you want to, however you need to communicate it. How do you feel about this? What do you make of this? And so, because I think, especially, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but being a coach and working with kids, you see from a different vantage point, that when you're not the parent, but you're the coach and you have a parental, influence on a kid, you see those difficulties in communicating. And with boys, it just, I never wanted Wes to be afraid to come to me with anything. And by and large, we've had conversations where I'm like, I really don't want to know this. I don't want to know this. But I was so grateful, that he would come and discuss those things. It wasn't always comfortable, but he was open enough. And like I said, he tried my patience a few times, but by and large, but we didn't have that issue. I think just allowing him to always being able to interject his thoughts, even if it wasn't going to change what we were doing, but having the ability to have a say, I think made a big impact on our relationship when he was growing up in the house.
Do you think powerlifting, the fact that you both shared a common sport, made it easier for you as a dad?
Easier, I think it gave us continuity. I think it's one of those things. We always want the best for our kid, but we always love the fact that they want to follow in our footsteps. And I always wanted Wes to do whatever he wanted to do and be as good at it. And but he wanted to power lift and he made sure that he had a conversation with me when he was maybe 13 years old. He said, you know, he asked me, he said, so what do you think about me powerlifting? And I said, well, I would love for you to do that, but what I want to make sure is that it's something that you want to do. I don't want you to do it because that's what I do. I don't want to put pressure on you that because I'm a power lifter, you should be. Do you have the propensity to be big and strong? Well, obviously the answer is yes. Even as a young boy, at 12 years old, he deadlifted over 300 pounds at a powerlifting meet. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's what he wants to do. He may want to play violin,
Right.
and I said, so make sure that you want to do it. And he goes, well, I think with you helping me that not only could I be good, I might be able to be great at this. And that's, the next 5 years, I coached him and competed with him. And so it gave us a connection where a lot of fathers and sons, where they were not athletes or they do, something, there wasn't a connection that like Wes and I had when we shared, not only that he was powerlifting, but he also powerlifted at a very, very high level.
Were there any other competitors his age at that level when he was competing?
No, it was one of those things where he would be very motivated because we had a pretty strong crew of guys. And so his target wouldn't be kids his age. There was one kid that was in Sevierville, Tennessee, that had broken records that I had actually done an article on for, I think it was called Power Mag. This is several years ago. And he and Wes met, and Wes actually, they thought I actually handled Josh at the WPA Worlds probably back in 2003. And he hit this ridiculous bench press, probably in the mid 400s. And we thought, no kid will ever touch that. Well, a few years later, my son came through and obliterated that record. And so he never really had anybody, that was a contemporary at that age. So he always lifted, with full grown men. And so that became his target. I want to lift more than so-and-so in the group or whatever the case may be.
You ever talk to him about girls and then women as he was growing up? And what kind of messages did you try? What messages did you feel compelled as a father to instill in him about women?
Well, it's one of those things where I always wanted him to understand how.
Hey, sorry. I just coughed over you and killed your mic. I'm such a jerk. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I always tried to instill in him to always first, no matter who you're dealing with, but especially with women, that you hold them in high esteem and respect. And I remember he and I having a conversation about a girlfriend at the time, and he was young, 14 years old, maybe 14, 15. And he said, I just never want her to be in a position where anything she does with me, regardless of what it is, that she would regret it. And so we always talked about, how would you want to be treated, why you would want to be treated that way. And we always kept things open about whether it be sex or whatever the case may be. Sorry about the dogs. And like I said, because he and I were so open with one another, let me shut that door real quick.
Okay. Take your time. Take your time. I talk to you anyway.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. That's okay. Don't worry. about it.
So I was always careful to try to be broad, not very specific. And again, because it always gave him a platform to let me know how he felt about a certain situation. And so he was always very open with me about those things. And again, what I always wanted him to do is be respectful. And he always was.
Yeah. The climate for men today is really interesting. I'll say interesting. We have toxic masculinity out there. You have lots of situations where there's apparently miscommunication of who wants to have sex, and the next day the guy is getting arrested. It's really a tenuous date. Like I wouldn't want to be dating. I wouldn't want to be dating. Now Wes is not dating anymore, but when he did start dating, did you have any kind of discussions? Were there situations that you felt needed to be talked about, especially when it came to sex?
Well, it's one of those things where I always told him, not only about being respectful, but make sure that regardless of what you're getting involved in, whether it be physical or otherwise, that there's other aspects. It's one thing just to have sex, but generally that there was a mental and emotional and even spiritual attachment to all those things, regardless of what you feel about religion.
I get
there's definitely a spiritual thing, a mental thing, and an emotional thing. And what I would hate for you and anyone that you chose to be with, is that you walked away from the situation, and once the situation was done, you were like, man, that was a bad idea. And that there's consequences. It's not just getting to, we try to scare everybody. She could get pregnant. Okay.
Yeah.
You could get a disease, and it's like, I think there's a bigger picture there. What if you love this person? What if you have those intimate feelings? You have to the big thing that I tried to do with him, there's cause and effect for everything that we do, everything. And that there's also always a price to pay. And there's a negative connotation typically attached to that. And I wanted to dispel that for him, to go, hey, understand that I had a conversation with him when he was about 11 or 12, when I knew he was a big, powerful kid. And one of the things that I really tried to impress upon him is that when you're a big, strong person, you also you got to understand that there's a really big responsibility with that.
Right.
You can't just get pissed off and punch the crap out of somebody, because you could see. It's one thing to bloody someone's nose. It's another thing to break their face. And it gets even in his day and age as a kid and a teenager. Now it's exponentially more complicated.
Right.
But I wanted him to understand that in that situation, there's a lot of cause and effect. But I wanted to make sure that it wasn't about fear, and there wasn't a lot of negative connotations, but that with that cause and effect, with the price that you pay, you know, that there's a lot of things going on, and I didn't want him to attach. I wanted him to be very open. I didn't want him to attach anything negative or scary or and again, be very open about all those things. So we did have those conversations. We never really discussed much about the mechanics of all of it.